Hey, from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Here in segment number 1, we got a lot of news in college basketball. A judge granted the Ohio Plaintiffs, 15 athletes in total that were hoping to be able to play this year with the new 5-year policy, an injunction to be able to play. We will outline that. We also had Yam Madar. That would be the gentleman that was supposed to be going to LSU after he was drafted in the 2020 NBA draft. He got that denied, so we're going to be talking about that and so much more. And then in segment number 2, Tristan Freeman. He does such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets. He's going to be joining me. We're going to talk about just what the injunctions that we all saw on Thursday mean moving forward. Are we going to be seeing a second wave in the transfer portal? And we've seen a little bit happening out there in the Atlantic 10 as well. We're going to be chatting with them about the fact that George Mason picks up James Najee and so much more. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larzium, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. And I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions, because not a lot of days are like Thursday where we get a whole bunch of news that comes through. And how about if we do dive in right away on the fact that we've got a lot of players that are now going to be gaining a little bit of eligibility, because we did see it go down on Thursday to where the injunctions, they were all able to go through, as this includes Phil Brochevin, MJ Collins, who was supposed to be going to Cincinnati, Kobe King, who I think is out there in the market, and these are all guys that are able to enter in the transfer portal now outside the window as well. So Jalen Washington was one of those guys. He's going to be eligible. AJ Storr, which, boy, the long and winding road of AJ Storr, he's going to be out there as well. And I'm just going to pull up the names right now because there's quite a few of them that are out there. Malik Messina Moore is one of them. He was over there at Montana. You just know him better as Malik Moore. Kobe King, who I was mentioning a little bit before as well. You've got Javon Bennett, Ice Emery, who he was over at Western Carolina, and I believe that he played a little bit over at Cleveland State as well. Jalen Quinn, who he was over at Loyola Chicago. And then you've got Savannah White, that is a women's college basketball player that is not going to be affecting us for the transfer portal this season. Donovan Brown, he was playing at the non-Division I level, so whoop-de stinking do there. Christian Henry, he was a pretty solid player when he was playing at the Division I level. He was playing in the MAC, so that's a guy that's going to be of impact. Zaire Wells, he played Wells over at Oakland University. You've got Christian Carroll, who was playing over at Youngstown State for a little bit of time. Caden Boom Boom Powell, Sean Phillips Jr., Josh Reed. So you've got a lot of interesting guys that are now out there in the transfer portal, and I am very, very curious to see what is going to be happening moving forward, because now I think that you got a whole bunch of cases that are going to be had. Now the question is, who's all going to be out there that is going to be willing to spend the money? Like, I look at a team like Kentucky, for example, that's going to be big, and we're going to get to LSU in a second. With Yam Madar not being eligible, you have to think that RJ Lewis is not going to be eligible. And if they grant RJ Lewis eligibility, I don't know what's happening with college basketball right now. That's going to be one to be taking a look at as well. But man, this is going to be very interesting to see what we get, because we're going to have a lot of court cases coming out. Like I said, we've got one or two guys like MJ Collins, who was going to be going to Cincinnati if he was eligible. He's already decided that he's going to be going there, so that instantly helps him out, because I was feeling a little bit tepid and bearish on Cincinnati before this news. I think that this is going to be helping them out quite a bit, and it's going to be an intrigue to see which of these teams that really, really needs to be able to fill out their rosters are going to be able to do so. As of right now, I've not seen any of these guys that got the injunction immediately enter in the transfer portal. That'll be in the coming days and coming weeks, because there's a lot that's going to be happening here. But boy, oh boy, it is going to be interesting to say the least. And then on Thursday, we did see Yam Madar officially get his eligibility denied in terms of being able to play for the LSU Tigers. This is the guy that was drafted in the 2020 NBA draft. He was 25 plus years old, and had they granted him eligibility, I don't know where we're going here, and this is why people are just disliking LSU. And I've had so many LSU fans here, and I'm wearing an LSU jersey as I am talking about this right now, so there's no bias for or against LSU here. There is bias for and against I mean, just basic college basketball. And so many people for LSU are saying, oh, you just hate LSU because it's Will Wade and everything like that. You don't do this to anyone else. No, like, Alabama absolutely deserved to get lambasted for the Charles Bediako situation. Baylor made a mockery of college basketball for the James Najee situation. Now, ironically enough, he's going to be over at George Mason for this upcoming season as well. Like, you go down the list, every single one of these deserves to be on call. It just so happens that LSU is trying this with their whole stinking roster. Like, that's why you're getting more flack than anyone else, and it's not because, oh, LSU is this powerhouse and everything like that. I mean, LSU hasn't made a deep run in the NCAA tournament since Glenn Big Baby Davis was there, and I do love Glenn Big Baby Davis. That was a great run in the NCAA tournament, but I mean, with this whole situation, like, what Will Wade is doing is, I mean, there was, I believe, Avetta Aberman joined me on the podcast. She does a great job covering college basketball. She was talking about depleting the resources for everyone else. That's what it feels like it's doing. And I mean, maybe LSU is doing us all a favor right now because the NCAA has had absolutely no rules, not even like guidelines or anything like that in terms of how to handle these international players. And if you hate LSU, you have to hate the NCAA as well. It's a two-way street here because the NCAA is just full of a bunch of morons that have no idea what they're doing, flying by the seat of their pants, and they could have gotten out in front of this in a long time, and instead they've decided that they are going to become the Washington Generals of the court system because they had no idea what they were doing for a long, long time. They thought they were going to be able to set up this system, have it going for an eon, and no, it was not. So they never got out in front of it, but for LSU, it's going to be very interesting to see how they operate moving forward. Good news for them. With the injunctions that we saw in college basketball on Thursday, they're going to have a lot of players that they're not guys that were drafted in the 2020 NBA draft that they're going to be able to pick from. Everything is going to be on the up and up there, but I mean, with LSU, it's a very unique situation, and a lot of people are wondering, oh, why does everyone hate LSU so much? It's because not only are you trying to bend the rules, you're trying to break it over your leg like a baseball player does after he strikes out with his baseball bat, and then you're trying to just lay waste to it, set fire to everything. That's the big reason why LSU has been getting the flack that they, in my opinion, just rightfully deserved, and it's not just Will Wade. If Coach K was trying this, we should be taking him to task. Roy Williams, you insert Furman. Furman would be getting the exact same lambastement right now that LSU is. So that's where I'm at on that, but certainly a interesting day for college basketball, to say the least, on Thursday, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more with our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. He does an amazing job over at the Field of 68, and so much more right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Tristan Freeman aboard. He does such excellent work over at Bustin' Brackets. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He is got his finger on the finger of the pulse all 12 months out of the year. He does an absolutely exceptional job over at so many places like the Field of 68, Bustin' Brackets, and so much more. And you're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at Oops351 altogether. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg.
Tristan, we got a lot of news in college basketball on Thursday, a bunch of injunctions for a lot of players, either getting a fifth year of eligibility, or if it was a little bit dicey, they were able to have that pass through. How are you taking a look at this? Because I have to think that there's more lawsuits coming through, and we might see an incredible second wave here in the transfer portal, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's fascinating because there's probably going to be more players than there are spots available, because a lot of guys who had already entered the portal had, a specific price tag. So, you look at a guy like Javon Bennett, who could go back to Dayton or could enter the portal. How many high major teams have a starting spot for him? And he could be a reserve because, teams like Kentucky and others always have backup spots. But if you're a guy like Javon Bennett who is all league, do you necessarily want to go for that kind of position? So there's going to be a lot of guys who can probably enter the portal, but I don't know, again, how many viable spots there are because not a lot of teams have much money available after shelling out for the guys who were already eligible.
Yep, it's going to be so interesting to take a look at that aspect of things. And then there were a few players like an MJ Collins, for example. It looked like he was going to be going to Cincinnati. They were unsure if they were going to be able to get him or not. Now they are going to be able to get him. And I think that these are the teams that really benefit the most because there were some guys that entered in not knowing whether or not they were going to get eligibility. And those were the guys that got a lot of eligibility today as well.
Yeah, and look, I mean, a lot of these guys are going to be seniors coming up, and I think we all knew once the NCAA passed the rule that it was going to be pretty messy for the 2022 class of players. But there's going to be a lot of guys who are eligible, but where are they going to be? And look, there are some big names who could be getting eligibility, like Kay Tyson, who averaged around 20 games in Minnesota. Would he come back or go somewhere else? That's to be known, but the key rule was that players can enter the portal without one being open. So now, it doesn't matter whether these guys entered before or not. If you, get a favorable ruling, you can go anywhere you want. And that opens up a lot of things, especially for teams who reportedly are getting, some, tough injury news. And we know that's going to happen throughout the offseason. So maybe some of these guys will just wait and see what opens.
Yep, I think that that's going to be a really fascinating aspect of this as well. It's Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And you mentioned a lot of these teams have spent their allotment, but there are a few teams with money as well. Is there maybe a few out there that you think could pursue one or two of these guys and might be in a position to actually pick one of them up?
I mean, LSU, obviously. I mean,
Yeah.
You got the news that the Israeli guard isn't going to be coming over. They still have to deal with RJ Louise, who, considering all the other lawsuits, a former NBA draftee coming back in has not been accepted yet, as we saw with Charles Bediako's saga. So if Louise isn't eligible, then LSU needs multiple guards. And, that would be a team that certainly will have money available. I think Kentucky, considering they missed out on the UCLA kid who signed this week, they have another spot or so. Teams like maybe Gonzaga, after losing Jack Khalil to the draft. But other than that, it's hard to see how many teams have money available because, and hey, maybe Michigan, because I think they're also in the Costa Rica sweepstakes as well. Maybe they look for a wing. But since everyone is basically committed to returning under Mike Boynton, they probably won't be able to get another transfer. But who knows?
Yep, it is going to be interesting to see what we get out of those teams. And I'm so glad that you brought up LSU because Yam Madar, shock, surprise, a guy that was drafted in the 2020 NBA draft, did not end up getting eligibility the way it should be, in my opinion. That happened. And with LSU, just how do we take a look at the team right now? Because you can't think that RJ Lewis is going to get eligibility, even with everything that has happened here over the last few days. And that program just feels like a mess right now.
Yeah, I don't have any thoughts of LSU until opening night. I just, their top college players is Abi Bashir, who averaged 14 a game on a bad Kansas State team. Divine Iguachukwu, who was the eighth best player of Michigan State. And they have a whole bunch of international guys. And by the way, as we saw last year, there will be some international guys who excel and are great. Then there are others who are flat out bust. And then there's a bunch of others who they're good but not great. And for LSU, where's the all elite guys coming from? Because the SEC is still going to be great. Will Wade's a good coach, but he also, I would argue, underachieved a bit at NC State with that roster. There's a scenario where they're going to have real problems in year one. And unless they just, stack up with a whole bunch of transfers. But even then, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. My goodness, that is one of the biggest messes of a situation that I've ever seen. And that's why we've got our guy here, Tristan Freeman, to be able to straighten us out. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And no doubt about it, we've got a lot of intrigue out there. And with regards to just what we're getting right now in college basketball with so many of these injunctures, what have you, is there one or two players that you think are out there that could be able to make a big impact? Because we did see, I think AJ Storr was a part of that lawsuit. Jalen Washington, I think, was one of them, because I'm just looking at the talent pool out there right now. And I think what we saw here on this Thursday is actually going to make a massive impact for this upcoming season. But obviously, you mentioned it as well. Who's going to have enough money to be able to pick these guys up? And will they elect to take that over going overseas?
Yeah, and look, you mentioned a guy like AJ Storr. I don't really, I mean, his stock has fallen off dramatically ever since leaving Wisconsin. He was up and down to Kansas, and he led Ole Miss in scoring, but they were awful. And I think I don't know if he's a winner. Do you necessarily want AJ Storr as your second or third best player? I mean, if you're, say, a team like South Carolina who might be desperate, maybe, but others, I don't know. I mean, Kay Tyson was really good at Minnesota, even though they didn't win. But remember, he was awful at UNC. But again, if the price tags are low for all these guys, then why not? I mean, I think Jason Edwards from Providence, who can score a bunch but isn't really a great defender, he's also available. You mentioned Washington as a depth big man. I mean, these guys can help, but I also don't know if it changes the fortunes. I think for a lot of teams, they already have some level of depth. And, what will be the effect from that? Because a lot of these players have already signed. So they can't necessarily leave and enter the portal again because there's not going to be a lot of money available for them. So I do think teams got to be careful in not bringing in too much, because you can already have an upset roster even before November gets here.
Yep, no question about it. I think that it's going to be fascinating to see what is going to be happening with these teams as well. And what else was fascinating is that you're a man that you do a great job in terms of taking a look at the Atlantic 10. And since we last talked, George Mason made a little bit of an ad with James Donji, and he was another one of those guys that was a lightning rod player last year. A lot of people disagreed with him getting eligibility after being a second-round pick, part of the Karl Anthony Towns trade, and you're able to just go down the list. But what do you make of him going to George Mason? Because I don't know if James Donji is ever going to be able to provide anything whatsoever. I don't know if he's ever going to be a successful basketball player, but honestly, this feels like a relatively good fit. And honestly, if James Donji doesn't succeed here, I just don't know where he succeeds.
Yeah, I mean, he was bad at Baylor, and he was bad on a team with very little front court depth that couldn't defend. He gave them no offense. He could rebound a bit, but he also was foul prone. Maybe going down to the A-10 is better. They added a couple of transfers, Elijah Jones and Emmett Adair. They bring back Emmanuel Conga back. So I think ultimately the hope is that he can be a good 10 to 15 minute depth piece in the front court. And in the A-10, getting a solid big man doesn't hurt at all. But I do think he's a cautionary tale of other guys who are former draft picks that, look, sometimes you're just not very good, and it doesn't matter what your previous recruiting ranking was or whether or not you got picked in the NBA draft as sort of a high ceiling international piece. Some of these guys just aren't very good, and teams are going to figure that out, based on some of their own signings. But for George Mason in particular, it's a perfectly fine depth piece after losing Alan Spock and, Emma Drew this offseason. But yeah, I don't think we should prepare to hear much waves from him. If he plays a lot, there's a good chance that some of these other bigs have massively underachieved.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, but I do think that it's going to be really interesting to see what George Mason does moving forward, because the one thing that I will say about them is that it felt like they had a really good, shall we say, amount of forwards, but not necessarily a lot of true 7-footers. I think that their tallest players were 6'8", 6'9", so I think that's going to be interesting for them as well. And I do think that with regards to this entire Atlantic 10, it's been a good offseason for them. Maybe not the world's most amazing offseason, but a lot of these teams have been able to step up. I think that there's going to be a lot of competitive teams, and much like we always talk about with the ACC, the Atlantic 10 is always haunted by those teams that are just so bad that they become quad 3 and quad 4 losses. I think that that's something that has been fixed a little bit here in this offseason as well.
Yeah, I mean, Fordham brings back everyone they could and added some key pieces. LaSalle also brought back a few players, and St. Bonaventure, with their unique rebuild, is standing out for the wrong reasons. But we'll see what Woj has cooking up. And then Duquesne is an interesting one because they've had a very quiet offseason. I think people would have them more towards the bottom tier of the league just based off of a lot of the guys don't have much room for production. But Terrence Ginyard was part of one of the newer lawsuits, and if that goes in favor and he comes back to Duquesne, he was one of the five best players in the league last year. And they don't really have proven guards on the roster at the A10 level. If he were to come back for them, then all of a sudden they're a top half team and one that could be a contender to watch.
Yep, I think so as well. And just with regards to everything that we've been seeing over the last few weeks in college basketball, I just want to keep this a little bit open-ended. Is there a team or two that you're looking at right now and maybe you're feeling a little bit more bullish about them than most? It could be because they got a player or two eligible today. It could be just what we've seen over the last few weeks in general and maybe doing a little bit more research. But is there just one or two of those teams that are really standing out that you feel like deserves a little bit more love than what they're getting?
Well, I mean, we heard the news this week that Texas Tech should expect JT Toppin at some point next year. And, when healthy, he's one of the 5 or 10 best players in the country. So that's huge. And they don't really have a lot of front court depth. So they're going to be relying on him no matter what. It'll be interesting to see when he comes back. And then, another team in the Big 12 that I think, could be more surprising. I mean, obviously, MJ Collins committing to Cincy is huge news for them because he could be a lead scorer. But, West Virginia has an interesting roster. Miles Sattler is one of the top freshmen. You bring in Finley Bidstack from Butler, and they got a front court full of guys that can defend and rebound. So I think they were solid the first year for Ross Hodge, and I think they have a good chance to be even better next year. Sattler is as good as advertised.
Absolutely. I know that our guy Ryan McIntyre over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is feeling good about them. I'm feeling good about them. And I do want to just expand upon that a little bit. How much do you take a look at these teams? Because you mentioned West Virginia, for example, that they do go into some of these non-NCAA tournaments like the NIT, the Crown, and then have future success. Because I'm so glad that you mentioned that with West Virginia, because I felt like we saw last year with Nebraska and Central Florida. I think that that's something that goes very much overlooked with a lot of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, if you get some kind of roster continuity, I think that certainly will help. West Virginia does lose just about everyone, but I do think it confirms that Ross Hodge is a good coach who can compete against other teams. And I think that's probably more important than anything for him. But you also mentioned NIT success. Stephen Pearl, winning it for Auburn. I mean, he brings back Pettiford and Overton. And I think, despite having the toughest schedule and a lot of losses as a result, he did show some things in his first year. I think having that kind of postseason success will only make things easier for him in the second go around, even though people are still going to have their long-term questions about him.
Yep, and they did retain quite a bit of that roster from last year as well for Auburn. So I think that that'll be beneficial for them as well. Just like getting you on this podcast, my friend, it is always beneficial. I know that you are doing such a great job over at the likes of the Field of 68. You do a little bit of work over at Sleepers, obviously busting brackets, and so much more. So Tristan, let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopster351 on Twitter/X. You can also follow my various works at Busting Brackets, Field of 68 Daily, now on every Tuesday morning, and for Hoops HQ as well.
Absolutely, and our guy Tristan is doing such great work over at so many different platforms, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from the Spine Podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, largely on the mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And please do send in those Twitter/X questions. Helps me know what you guys will all want to be hearing for this upcoming college basketball season. And of course, you're still getting all these conference previews. Plan on doing the Ivy League within the next 48 to 72 hours. be on the lookout there, and we're going to be with you guys every single day on this podcast. I'm up to well over 2,400 straight days without a missed podcast, so we've got you guys all covered there. We're going to have great guests all throughout, and I'm going to try to make this the greatest college basketball season ever, so I'll be with you guys once again tomorrow and all throughout the offseason. Then once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.